Good evening, everybody. And I too want to begin with congratulating our staff here at COL for this ongoing shiur, Baruch Hashem, for a half a year. I want to thank all of the people involved who make it happen week in and week out. The staff of COL, our technician, our dedicated and selfless technician, Mendy Lewis, who allows this all to happen. Maybe Jacobson, who was on top of the entire project from the beginning, Menachem Cohen from COL, and all of those who assisted this weekly shiur, both in English and in Kurdish, on Wednesday night. As COL just reported to me, we have approximately 10,000 participants each week from all across the globe in learning. That was Chus Bas Rasha Zelda. And Mazel Tov to all of you who are part of this shiur. And thank you very much. Tomorrow is Erev Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Yomer, the 18th day of the year. This year falls out on Friday, tomorrow night, Thursday night. And as we know, it's the anniversary of the passing of the Yortzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, one of the greatest sages and spiritual giants in Jewish history. A man who was not only one of the greatest Tanoim, but also the author of the Zohar and the person who introduced most of the doctrines of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism to the world. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived in Eretz Yisrael under Roman occupation in the 2nd century, approximately in the year 165 after the Common Era, around 100 years after the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. He himself suffered terribly from Roman persecution, as the Gemara tells us the story in Masechta Shabbos, how he hid in a cave for 13 years. He was an extraordinary scholar and sage, the author of the Zohar, the most basic Kabbalistic work, and responsible for revealing to the world the wisdom of Kabbalah, of Pnimiyus HaTorah, of the esoteric, mystical dimension of Judaism, initiating a new era in the development of Kabbalah, of Chachmas HaNistar, of the esoteric wisdom and perspective of Judaism. Before his passing on the 18th day of Iyar, on Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Yomer, the Zohar tells us that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai instructed his disciples to observe his yahrzeit with great joy and festivity. Though normally a day of passing is a day of grieving, a day of mourning, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai asked particularly his students to celebrate each year the anniversary of his death as a simcha of great joy, since the day of a person's passing marks the culminating point of all of his achievements and accomplishments throughout his or her entire life. Since then, Jews the world over, especially at his resting place in Miron in the Holy Land, celebrate this day with singing, with dancing, with increased Torah study, with increased acts of love and Jewish unity, as a demonstration of great joy on the passing day of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. If you've ever been to Eretz Yisrael on Lag BaOmer, you know that hundreds of thousands of Jews literally go and spend the 24 hours of Lag BaOmer in Miron, kindling great flames and dancing in joy with the famous melodies of Lag BaOmer. An extremely exciting and festive atmosphere pervades Miron and really Jewish communities all across the globe. It's interesting that the fact that Lag BaOmer is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's yahrzeit was not known from earlier sources. It's not mentioned in Gemara. It's not mentioned in Zohar. The one who revealed that Lag BaOmer is the yahrzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and that's the reason that we celebrate Lag BaOmer, or one of the great reasons, was the Arizal. The Arizal, who's considered one of the greatest Kabbalists in Jewish history, who lived in the 1500s. He is the one who revealed in his Sfarim and Priyetz Chaim and Shara Kavonos and in other Sfarim that this is the Yom Hilul, it's the yahrzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Lag BaOmer was always celebrated. The question was why. One reason was the Meiri writes in Masechta Yevamos Samach Beis that the Gemara says in Yavam is that 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died between Pesach and Shavuos because they disrespected each other. And then Paschal Lamos, they ceased to die. The Meiri says it was on Lag BaOmer. That was one reason for the celebration. The Arizal revealed that this is also the yahrzeit of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. I guess the very revelation of Lag BaOmer had to come through Kabbalah too, through the Arizal. But this evening we want to focus on one particular custom that is practiced on the day of Lag BaOmer, and its connection and significance seems strange. There is an ancient custom on Lag BaOmer this year on Friday that Jewish children are taken to parks and fields to play with bows and arrows, to shoot arrows, obviously safeguarding them and their activities from any hazards through responsible children or parents or teachers, and so on and so forth. But this is an age-old Jewish custom. On Lag BaOmer, the kids go to the parks and they play with bows and arrows. The question is why? What's the significance of it? What's the meaning of this peculiar custom? So the Bnei Yisachar, a famous Hasidic text, in Maimorei Chodesh Iyar, in Maimer Gimel, the Inyan of Lag BaOmer, Ois Dalet, explains, gives us an interesting reason for this custom. He quotes the Yerushalmi in Brachas Perek Tes Halacha Beis, who says that the merit of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was so powerful that during his entire lifetime there was no rainbow which ever appeared in the sky. There was no keshes, a rainbow appearing in the sky. This is profoundly significant because, as we know, the pasuk says in Parshas Noach that the rainbow represents Hashem's covenant never to destroy the world again, even if the human race would degenerate to the point as it was prior to Noach's flood. So the rainbow would be God's reminder, a symbol of a covenant he made with Noach and the human race, that a flood to exterminate all of humanity would never occur again. But as long as Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was alive, his merit and piety alone were enough to ensure that Hashem would not regret his creation, so there was no need for a rainbow as a symbol of the covenant not to destroy the world. If Reb Shimon is alive in the world, this itself is a justification for existence. We don't need any other justification. His schus, his merit, was so powerful that it redefined existence to the extent that there's no rainbow, no need for a rainbow to remind Hashem, so to speak, that he would not regret creation and destroy the world again. On the day of Reb Shimon ben Yochai's passing on Lag BaOmer, however, the world was in need of a rainbow. Therefore, each year on this day, we recall the greatness of Reb Shimon ben Yochai by playing with the bow. Because in Hebrew, the word for a bow, keshes, the word keshes, refers to all bows and arches. It includes the rainbow. In fact, that's the term used in Genesis, in Parshas Noach and Bereshis. Parshas Noach, the term is keshes, and it also refers to the archer's bow. It's also called keshes. So by playing with the archer's bow, the keshes on Lag BaOmer, we're reminded of the greatness of Reb Shimon ben Yochai, that it's only after his passing, on the day of his passing, that the world was now in need of a keshes, of a rainbow, to protect its existence from, God forbid, another destruction. This is the reason given in Bnei Yisachar. However, this explanation poses two major problems. Number one, it seems far-fetched to associate the archer's bow with the celestial rainbow, just because they both include the word bow in English, the rainbow, the bow and arrow, and they share the same term in Hebrew, keshes. Still, what is the connection between a child going out to the park and shooting an arrow in the park to the rainbow existing in heaven after a rain as a symbol of God's protection of the world? Keshes, rainbow, bow. Come on, it seems like a very far-fetched and alien connection, and can serve as a great excuse of somebody dismissing Jewish customs as stereotypical and irrelevant. Here, look, in order to remind us of the rainbow that they needed after Reb Shimon ben Yochai's passing, we're going to the field and shooting bows and arrows. That doesn't seem like any sophisticated or thought out or logical connection between the two. That's one problem with this explanation. A second problem with this explanation is, according to the Bnei Yissachar's perspective, playing with bows and arrows on the day of Lag BaOmer constitutes a negative symbol. It reflects the tragic ability of the human race to destroy God's world, thus the need for the covenant of the bow, which was unnecessary during the life of Reb Shimon ben Yochai. But the question is, if Lag BaOmer, Reb Shimon ben Yochai asked, should be celebrated as a day of joy and festivity to commemorate his life and his impact, why would we institute a custom that might hamper the intense joy of the day requested by Reb Shimon ben Yochai himself? Why the need to focus on, during such a special day, on the power of mankind to sink to the lowest depths? On the day of Lag BaOmer, we ought to focus on the life of Reb Shimon ben Yochai, on the achievements of Reb Shimon ben Yochai, not on his death and on his passing. Therefore, at a Farbrengen of Lag BaOmer Tafshin Yud Aleph, Lag BaOmer 1951. In fact, the first Lag BaOmer after the Rebbe officially accepted upon himself the leadership of Chabad Lubavitch. At the Farbrengen of that Lag BaOmer, the Rebbe presented a few siches, a few talks, in which he explained, as well as on other occasions that year and in later years, that the bow and arrow professes a profoundly positive symbol as well. One that fits into the joyous nature of the day, celebrating the life and vision and impact of Reb Shimon ben Yochai. Indeed, he quotes the Zohar, which the Bnei Yissachar actually also quotes in a different context there. The Zohar, Chelek Aleph, Daf Ayin Beis says, Lo yisitzapi l'ragli de Meshicha di yischazi haikeshes. Begavnei nehirin, ukedein tzapi le'le Mashiach. The Zohar says, do not anticipate the coming of Mashiach until you see the shining colors of the rainbow. In other words, from the Zoharic perspective, authored by Reb Shimon ben Yochai, the bow represents also a deeply positive symbol. Which is why when you see the bow, now you should wait for Mashiach. And the question is why? One explanation you can say is the Gemara says in Sanhedrin that Mashiach can come either when the world is totally good or totally bad. When we're kulei zakai, dersha kulei zakai, kulei chayev. Either a generation that's innocent, that's meritorious, or a generation that's a lost case. That's when Mashiach comes. So when you see the rainbow, I shouldn't be laughing. When you see the rainbow, which represents God's covenant with the world not to destroy it again, even if it's deserving of destruction. So this is the time of Mashiach dersha kulei chayev. But from the context of Zohar there, it's clear that the Zohar means it in a positive sense. That there's something about the rainbow that allows us to anticipate the coming of Mashiach because of a positive symbol there. And when we understand this, we will be able to understand how Lag BaOmer, when we celebrate Reb Shimon ben Yochai's life, it is appropriate to play with a bow and arrow, not just because after his death we now need the rainbow in heaven, but because the very sport of bows and arrows is metaphoric and representative of the unique message and celebration of Lag BaOmer, the life of this great Tanner Reb Shimon ben Yochai. To understand this, we have to analyze the significance of the bow and arrow, both from a literal and a spiritual point of view. The first weapons devised by the human race were designed for hand-to-hand combat. There was the sword, the spear, the axe, and the like. Yet, these were insufficient because a person's enemy or prey is not always an arm's length away. The person's enemy may not even always be within sight. So the warrior or the hunter were inventing an array of weapons which were capable of reaching targets that are a great distance away, or that even lie invisible, protected behind barriers or veils of any sort. So the sword or the axe or the hammer or the spear did not suffice for the distant foes. They only worked for the close foes, for the foe that's right here. So you can wrestle with your arms or with other parts of your body or use a close-up weapon. But for the distant foe, they needed to develop other weapons. Chief among the new weapons was the bow and arrow. It was invented early in human history. In the Tanakh and Chumash itself, we have mention of the bow as a weapon. Both Yitzchak and Yaakov Avinu discuss it with their sons. Yitzchak Avinu discusses it with his son Esav. Yaakov Avinu discusses it on his deathbed. Asher lakachti miyad ha'emoiri, b'charbi u'b'kashti, with my sword and with my bow. And for many countries and for many cultures, the bow and arrow has served as a primary weapon in human life for a very long time. There is a quote I saw in his book, The Origin of the Family, Private Property in the State. Friedrich Engels comprehensively deals with the bow, the conditions under which it was invented, the value of its invention. He writes these words, which are interesting to quote in this context. The bow is already a very complex weapon, representing a long period of accumulated experience, refinement of mental power, and the coordinated understanding of the relationship between a range of other inventions. Even at its simplest, the bow is a rather complex weapon in its overall constitution, combining as it does the bow itself, the string, the arrow shaft, which must interact mechanically in a complex fashion. The bow and arrow became the decisive weapon in an era of savagery. Their appearance heralded a high level of development, and through them, hunting for game became one of the normal branches of labor. In the writings of Kabbalah and Hasidus, yet, there is another dimension of the bow that's emphasized more than anything else. The Alter Rebbe has a long discussion on this in his book, Torah. In the Hisafis, the Parshas Vayechi, in the Maimer, Asher lakachti miyad ha'emoiri, b'charbi u'b'kashti, where he explains that the person who invented this device had to grasp a paradox. The paradox we take for granted today, but as Engels pointed out, we should not take it for granted. It was complex. It had to be devised with much wisdom and intuition at a very early stage in human history. The paradox is this: the deadly arrow must first be pulled back towards one's own heart in order to strike the heart of the enemy. The more we draw the bow, the more we draw the arrow towards ourselves, the more distant a location, a target it could reach. So the arrow always has to be pulled back in order to strike further. And the further the distance, the more you have to draw it back with more vigor, with more momentum, with more power. One of the great ideas of Kabbalah and Chassidus is that every physical invention and phenomenon originates in the realm of the metaphysical, in the realm of the spiritual. So the two types of weapons, the sword and the bow, designed essentially for two different types of foes, exist also on a psychological, emotional, and spiritual plane. Every human being professes two types of foes, both within our psyche and outside of our psyche, within our environment. There are exposed enemies and there are hidden enemies. Exposed foes are the conscious patterns and behaviors in our lives that openly and overtly threaten our well-being. These are realities or patterns that we are aware of. We cannot deny them. They are right in front of our eyes. They may be obsessions, habits, cravings, dispositions, qualities that people harbor, behaviors that revolve around deception, lying, cheating, vengeance, hate, bitterness, cruelty, animosity, selfishness, anger, jealousy, and so on and so forth. Every person according to their nature and their unique set of challenges and dynamics. When you realize that you have a very negative habit, a bad temper, a terrible ego, whatever it may be, and you don't deny that you're deteriorating, you see it in front of your eyes, then we can say that your enemy, your demon, is open, it's naked, it's accessible, it's right here. Look at it, analyze it, deal with it. Take your sword and fight it. Take your arms and wrestle it. But every person, or many people, possess also an entirely different array of skeletons. 150 years before Sigmund Freud, the founder of the Chabad school of Kabbalah, the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shnei Zalman of Liadi, spoke at length of the destructive forces within our lives that are often invisible and indiscernible. They lurk in the subconscious cellars of our psyche and sometimes subconscious cellars of our psyche. Says the Alter Rebbe in Torah, his Sofis to Vayichi, and in many other places in his writings and many other Hasidic writings. These are subconscious, primal instincts and formations that may live under cover for decades. They infect our lives, they erode our relationships, but they never expose their face. Subconscious fear, shame, insecurity, self-hate, guilt, loneliness, detachment, alienation, apathy, egotism, promiscuity, and many other subliminal streaks which are often buried beneath myriads of strata of identity, but which nonetheless exercise profound influence over our daily lives, our work, and our relationships with people, with our loved ones, with our families, and of course with God Almighty Himself. The same is true concerning addictions. Last week, in Parshas Bahar, we discussed at length addictions. And I'm not going to discuss addictions tonight at length again. I don't want you to think that I am addicted to discussing addictions, although it may be true. But with addictions too, we see these two types of patterns. There are addictions that serve as a visible enemy, and there are addictions that are a hidden enemy. There are addictions where the person comes to realize that this is my enemy, it's destroying my life. But the great challenge of so many addictions is that people start telling themselves, I'm functioning. I'm married. I have a home. I have children, thank God. I make a living. I even make an extra couple of dollars, which I can squander once in a while or often. My life is functional. I have friends. I'm charming. I'm charismatic. I'm clever. I'm successful. I'm ambitious. I have great moments. They are not realizing how the addiction is serving as a distant foe that they can't see. It's not in their eyes' reach. Their conscious self doesn't see what's going on. How slowly they're slipping down a slope. Yes, they feel a little agony. They feel a little misery. But before they get in control of it, it often takes control of them. And it's out of hand. Whether it's an addiction to alcohol, to marijuana or to other substances, to gambling, to promiscuity, to food, and to other negative, destructive behavior, which often people think they can get away with. Their lives are functional. But a few years down the line, and they're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're losing their homes, they're losing their work, they're losing their wife, they're losing their children, and they lose their soul. They lose their happiness, they lose their harmony, they lose their wholesomeness, they lose perhaps the most important thing, their integrity, their courage, their honesty in life, their soul. They lose their God. But it doesn't happen momentarily, it's a slow process. These are invisible foes, and invisible foes are often very dangerous. Sometimes our inner destructive forces come disguised in masks of holiness. Religion is an example. People often employ religion as a tool to cover up for inner dysfunction, sometimes for inner selfishness. Blame religion. Religion can often serve as a mask for dysfunctionality that we don't want to deal with, foes that we do not want to face. These are the two categories of foes within, the visible and the invisible. But it's not only within, there are also obstacles from without. In any project, in any initiative, in any dream, in any vision, a person who's trying to create positivity and spread light in the world often encounters obstacles not within but from without. Often the obstacles are visible. There are forces or people or structures or bureaucracy that are visibly opposing a positive phenomenon, whatever that positive phenomenon may be. There's one way to deal with them, but then there are invisible foes. And this becomes much more difficult to discern and to identify because you don't see your target. You may not even know it's your target. It actually may be somebody who presents himself as your best friend. At the time you realize, et tu, Brute, Caesar has already fallen. And thus, the hidden forces of destruction are often more lethal than the exposed ones, because their invisibility allows for denial, sometimes for profound denial, sometimes for perpetual denial. Denial, as they say, is not only a river in Egypt, it's a part of so many people's lives. To deal with them, you can't use the regular old-fashioned weapons, which can only be effective on close and open enemies. To confront the invisible enemy, you have to employ an entirely new and different style weapon, the bow and the arrow. Says the Alter Rebbe. And the Rebbe explains it in Lag Ba'omer Yud Aleph and in other sichos and other talks, and in other sources in Chassidus. The secret of the bow and arrow, as mentioned, is the truth, which is paradoxical, that the more one draws the arrow towards oneself, the more distant and invisible a foe it can reach. What does this represent psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually? For a person to conquer his or her inner disguised demons, his subliminal fears, his subconscious evil, his secret addictions, he must have the courage to pull back and retreat to the core of his or her soul. Just like the arrow, he must go back and go deep, deep into his heart, into his neshama, into his psyche, into his soul. Some problems in life can be acquired, can be solved by acquiring skills to deal with this impediment or that impediment. Some trials, however, require not outer change, but inner transformation. Not a change of pace, but a change of heart. They necessitate the courage of going to places where you may have never gone, of trailblazing pathways that have never been charted. They demand of you to discover what you actually look like on the inside. And that requires tremendous courage. It's often painful, and it often necessitates much vulnerability. To deal with these types of enemies, you must have the courage to pull the arrow towards yourself. And the more distant the foe is, and therefore the more lethal it is, the more you have to draw back into yourself and go in deep, deep. To go to deeper layers of a person's identity, to places we're usually fearful of going. We have never been there. It's only there where we can discover the inspiration, the fortitude, the strength, the clarity, the confidence, the faith, and the hope to be able to defeat the invisible foe which wants to defeat us. Now we will understand the deeper meaning of playing with bows and arrows on Lag BaOmer, the day that marks in many ways the birth of Kabbalah, the birth of Jewish mysticism, because as mentioned, the yahrzeit of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is a day which brings together his achievement, his impact. Torah is comprised of two parts. Torah, the divine blueprint for existence, for creation. Just like there are two types of weapons, Lahavdil Torah too, the body of Jewish wisdom given by the Creator to the Jewish people and to the world, is comprised of two parts, reflecting two streams of Judaic thought, the rational and the mystical, the exoteric and the esoteric, Nigla and Nister, the revealed and the hidden, Jewish law and Jewish mysticism, the revealed part of the Torah and the hidden dimensions of Torah. Together, these two dimensions make up the absolutely fascinating and brilliant mosaic and tapestry of Torah thought. But each has its unique function and role. The former can be compared to the sword, the latter to the bow. Nigla, Gemara, Halacha, Poiskim, Rishonim, Acharonim, even Musar can be defined more or less as the sword. Kabbalah, Chassidus, Medrash as the bow. The first stream of Torah, which discusses Jewish law, Jewish ethics, is like the close-range weapon that helps a human being in meeting the open challenges of life and the conscious demons in one's heart. It teaches us to distinguish between good and evil, between right and wrong, between the moral and immoral, the ethical and the unethical, the holy and the profane, the light and the darkness. Halacha, mitzvahs, the details of mitzvahs are a blueprint to live a life based on God's blueprint for the human psyche, for the Jewish psyche, and for human existence. It tells us what is good and what is not good, what is constructive and what is destructive for our being and for the world around us, for our physical, psychological, and emotional and spiritual self. It focuses primarily on our behavior, what we do and what we should not do, what we should say and what we should not say, what type of active thoughts we should engage in. It expresses, in other words, God's blueprint on the expressed dimension of our lives, on those aspects of our lives that are manifested, that are revealed in a vivid and exposed and conspicuous way. The revealed part of Torah guides us, instructs us, inspires us, and shows us how to live a life, a revealed life, a manifestly revealed life, that will make sure that the enemy that is there right in front of our eyes, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, whether within or without, that always tries to undermine the human being, to undermine the integrity of the Jew, to detach him or her from our true mission statement and our true priorities and our true essence, is dealt with, is confronted, is defeated, or at least pushed aside for the moment. But how about the essence of the eye? Who am I in my very quintessence? Beyond my daily schedules and patterns. Beyond what I do in the morning when I go to shul to daven. When I go to have a shiur to learn. When I engage in this mitzvah or in that mitzvah. When I do a favor to somebody. When I speak or abstain from speaking in a certain way. Wer bin ich? Who am I in my very essence? What am I in my very identity? I am not asking what I'm doing, I am asking who am I? How about the subconscious ills of the spirit? What about the underlying and primal attitudes and perceptions that never allow the person to truly transcend his little bubble and touch the divine? How about the ego or the evil that often lies buried beneath the layers of mortal man, sometimes even beneath the religious layers of mortal man? What about the deeper chaos at the core of human consciousness? How about the profound void and sense of disintegration in the subcellar of the human psyche? How about the existential loneliness and the deeply embedded challenges beyond the conscious reach of our psyche, which filters all of our unconscious emotions? This is where the hidden part of Torah plays its primary role. The teachings of Kabbalah, the teachings of Hasidus, have come to the world to tell the dramatic story of the interplay among the soul of man, the soul of God, so to speak, and the soul of history, entangled with one another in a courageous attempt to bring the world face to face with its creator. This part of Torah, Kabbalah and Hasidus, known as Pnimiyus HaTorah, focus primarily on the nature of the soul of man and the soul of all existence. Just like the bow, Kabbalah and Hasidus inspire the person to delve into the quintessence of his or her consciousness, to uncover the fragment of God, the Chelek Eloka Mima'al, that constitutes the core of Jewish existence and allows us to encounter the true depth of life and to stand up to the multitude of undisclosed demons that attempt to extinguish the light of Hashem in our soul and in the soul of the world. Perhaps beyond everything else, Kabbalah and Hasidus have come to teach us how the world, how the universe is essentially a continuous divine symphony. How the human being in his or her core, is essentially an aspect of God's reality, part of a continuous ballad of divinity that we are challenged to uncover and expose, to connect to at every moment of our day and every moment of our night. And this is the reason why the Jew needs to learn both parts of Torah, Nigla and Hasidus, the outer and the inner. People who learn only Hasidus, and there are such people. There are Jews who dedicate their lives or have a schedule every day to learn merely the hidden parts of Torah, Hasidus. One can often recognize that their essence, may be in a very good place, may be very powerful, very positive. But there is often a disconnect between the essence of their eye and their expressed and daily personality. Yes, Kabbalah and Hasidus touch a very deep place. They affect and transform the very eye. And you can see it. But without a deep and intimate and ongoing connection with all of Torah, with Gemara, with Halacha, with Tanakh, with Mishnayos, and so on and so forth, there is a disconnect, there is a fragmentation. It's almost like their hidden eye is refined, but their outer eye is often disconnected from their inner eye. And their outer eye is sometimes in the abyss, or close to the abyss. And that's why they must. There is no being a Jew, a full-fledged Jew, of learning Jewish spirituality and Jewish mysticism alone. It doesn't work. You're dealing with your hidden enemy, but there's an enemy right in front of you that you're ignoring. So somebody who learns Chassidus all day, even if you learn Chassidus all day, or you only learn Chassidus once a day or once in 2 days, you may have touched the hidden enemy, But there's an enemy right in front of you. Why don't you deal with him? And when he gives you the punch, or he gives you the stab, you don't have the vessels to deal with him. Yes, you deal with profound spiritual concepts that touch you in a deep place, and at a great moment will emerge in its ferociousness and spiritual vigor. But in your day-to-day interactions and your daily behaviors and patterns and schedules, there's a disconnect. Conversely, a person who only learns nigla, who learns Gemara and who learns Halacha and is dedicated to it, often they may be doing everything right and knowing everything right. But who are you for real? Who are you in a very deep place? Wer bist du? Where's your etzem? Where's your essence? Story. Last generation, before the war, there was a great Jew who authored a book on Lashon Hara, on the prohibition not to speak gossip. And before he published it, he sent the manuscript to many rabbis in different parts of Eastern Europe to receive an approbation from them. And this person, his emissary, traveled to receive an endorsement from many a rabbi. And of course, most of them gave an endorsement for this great book, which encouraged and demonstrated the exact path of not to engage in Lashon Hara and gossip. One of the Hasidic Rebbes in Poland saw the manuscript. I think it was the Kalever Rebbe. He's a very sharp Jew. And when he read the manuscript, or so the story goes, he looked at it and he refused to give an approbation. He just said one line. Und trachten Lashon Hara megmen? Reden nicht und trachten, yeah. Which means, you're not allowed to speak gossip Lashon Hara, but you're allowed to think Lashon Hara. In other words, what he meant, I believe, was he had a hard time with the obsession on not engaging verbally in gossip. As though the person is a robot, and we create a program that when you want to speak gossip, don't say it. But what about internally? Internally, you may hate the person, you despise the person, you enjoy scoffing at the person, gossiping about the person. You just put a zipper in your mouth. You just put a zipper to your mouth. So of course it may be productive and it's the right thing, and just because you have inner emotions, you should not speak Lashon Hara. There's another mitzvah, don't hate your brother in your heart. It's a separate mitzvah. But he felt that it's not capturing the real message of Lashon Hara. Thinking you're not, speaking you're not allowed to, and thinking you're allowed to. Why don't you discuss a way of a person reaching a place within himself that he doesn't have the thought to speak Lashon Hara? Don't deal with the symptom, deal with the cause. This was his reservation, and hence he didn't give his endorsement. The messenger came back to the great rabbi who wrote the book, who looked through the endorsements and realized that this person was not ready to give his askom. So he asked the messenger, what happened by this Rebbe? So obviously the messenger didn't want to tell the story. He didn't want to say, Lashon Hara. He didn't want to badmouth this person. So he didn't answer. So his teacher, his mentor, asked again, tell me, it's important for me to know what people are thinking, what great rabbis are thinking. What did he say? He didn't want to say, he didn't answer. So after a few times, his mentor, not getting an answer, clear answer from him, thought for a moment, and he said, no. So the messenger told him, Rebbe, dasa tegezah. Rebbe, that is what he said. This is the great contribution of Kabbalah and Chassidus. It focuses on the hidden enemy. And it focuses on the hidden dimension in the person himself or herself. Just as the arrow, the more we withdraw it into our hearts, into ourselves, which is what Kabbalah and Chassidus does, it can target a more invisible part of existence. Both the invisible part in ourselves, the quintessence of our identity, and the invisible foes around us in our environment. There was a time in history when the revealed part of Torah was sufficient. The Kabbalah remained concealed from most of the people, and only a select few passed it on from one generation to another generation. But as the world became a more complicated place, and humans became much more complex, and modernity emerged challenging the truth of Torah and mitzvahs in a very profound way, causing really the disintegration of much of the Jewish world, challenging Torah not through blatant decrees, not necessarily through blatant hatred and persecution, but through the sophisticated guise of enlightenment, of modernity, of freedom, of liberty, of democracy, of sophistication, of science. Not through the barbaric methods that Jew haters used for thousands of years, but through the methods of modernity and enlightenment, progress, advancement. Divine providence sent the great masters, beginning with the Baal Shem Tov and his students, to take the Kabbalah of Reb Shimon bar Yochai and make it accessible to every Jew. But there were stages in this process. In ancient times, even before Reb Shimon bar Yochai, Kabbalah was totally concealed. Then came the time when divine providence sent Reb Shimon bar Yochai to teach us how to begin to open windows to the superconscious forces of our soul. How to discover that deep place in the human soul where man and God are both strangers and brothers. But the Kabbalah was still concealed. And then at a later point it became more revealed. And then the Arizal revealed it in an extraordinary way in the 1500s. And he said, together with his student Reb Chaim Vital, that now is mitzvah legale zeis hachachma. It's a mitzvah to reveal this wisdom. But then again, there were many obstacles and there was much opposition, especially in the 1600s with Shapsei Tzvi and so on and so forth. And then Hashem sent the Baal Shem Tov, the neshama of the Baal Shem Tov and his students, and the students of his students till this generation, who revealed the well springs of Chassidus to give the arrow to the Jew. And this is the meaning of the Zohar. When you see the rainbow, when you see the keshes, you could wait for Mashiach because the arrow, the keshes, represents the ability to go into the deepest part of the human identity and to go into the deepest part of the world and to show its essential relationship with godliness, which is what Mashiach is going to reveal. Reb Shimon bar Yochai, the man most responsible for the dissemination of Kabbalah, taught the Jewish people how to use the bow and the arrow, the spiritual bow and arrow. Hence, Yiddish Kinderlach, Jewish children every year on Lag BaOmer go out to the park and play with the bow and arrow, paying tribute to this great master and giving gratitude to him and of course to our Creator for giving us not only the spiritual sword, Becharbi, but also for giving us the spiritual bow and arrow, Bekashti, through which the Jew can complete the drama, the saga, the journey of creation to allow us to meet the divine face to face. Have a wonderful evening.